6 chilling true Reddit horror stories. Number 1. The Haunting of Room 104. I had just checked into the hotel, tired from a long drive. The front desk clerk seemed a bit hesitant when she handed me the key to room 104. She glanced nervously at me, but I brushed it off, eager to get some rest. As I stepped into the room, an unsettling chill ran down my spine. The air felt heavy and thick, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The decor was outdated, and the dim lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the space feel claustrophobic. I noticed the mirror across from the bed was covered with a thick layer of dust, as if it hadn't been touched in years. As I unpacked my bags, I heard a faint whisper, so soft that I could barely make out the words. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my tired mind. While brushing my teeth, I felt an icy breeze on the back of my neck. I turned around, but the window was closed and locked tight. The bathroom light flickered, casting ominous shadows that danced across the room, and my reflection seemed to waver in the mirror. When I finally crawled into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The room was eerily silent, amplifying every creak and groan. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard a soft knock on the door. I opened it to find an empty hallway, with no signs of anyone having been there. Throughout the night, I was plagued by vivid nightmares of a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed, watching me with piercing eyes. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, and the room felt even colder than before. The clock showed 3 a.m. I heard scratching sounds coming from the closet. Hesitantly, I opened the door, but found nothing inside. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Get out, while you still can." My blood ran cold. The TV turned on by itself, static filling the screen, and a chilling voice whispered my name through the white noise. I tried to call the front desk, but the phone line was dead. Panic set in as I realized I was completely alone. The walls seemed to close in on me, and I felt a growing sense of dread that I couldn't explain. I noticed a strange, dark stain on the carpet near the bed. It looked like dried blood. As I stared at the stain, I heard the faint sound of sobbing coming from under the bed. My heart raced as I leaned down to look. There was nothing there, but the sobbing continued, growing louder and more desperate. I turned on every light in the room, hoping to dispel the darkness and the fear that was consuming me. Just as I thought I was losing my mind, the bathroom door creaked open on its own, revealing a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. The figure stepped into the light, and I saw the hollow eyes and gaunt face of a woman, her expression filled with anguish. She raised a trembling hand, pointing at the mirror, and I saw words scrawled across the glass: "Help me." My breath caught in my throat as the figure vanished, leaving the room eerily silent once more. I knew I had to get out of there, but the door wouldn't budge, as if it was being held shut by an invisible force. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I could feel a presence moving closer. I fumbled for my phone, using the screen's light to navigate, but it was quickly dying. As the battery drained, I saw the figure reappear in the mirror, closer this time, her eyes filled with despair. She mouthed the words, "Save me," and then disappeared, leaving me alone in the dark. I finally managed to force the door open and ran down the hallway, not stopping until I reached the lobby. The front desk clerk looked at me with pity in her eyes, and she simply said, "You're not the first." Have you ever felt a presence you couldn't explain? Share your experiences in the comments below. Number 2. The Ghost in the Attic. Moving into our new home was supposed to be a fresh start for my family. The house was old but charming, with plenty of space for our growing family. However, from the moment we stepped inside, something felt off. The attic door was padlocked, and the realtor told us it was just for safety reasons, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. On our first night, I heard faint footsteps coming from above, even though the attic was supposedly empty. The next morning, I found my daughter's toys scattered across the floor, even though I had put them away before bed. My wife mentioned hearing whispers at night, but I brushed it off as the house settling. One evening, I found the attic door ajar, the padlock hanging loosely from the latch. I hesitated but decided to investigate, climbing the narrow staircase into the dark, musty space. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from a small, grimy window at the far end. As I explored, I found old furniture covered in sheets, and an eerie feeling of being watched washed over me. I discovered a box of old photographs, the faces of the people in them blurred and distorted. A chill ran down my spine as I realized some of the photos were of our house, but taken decades ago. I heard a creak behind me and turned to see a shadowy figure standing at the top of the stairs. The figure was barely visible in the dim light, but I could feel its eyes on me, filled with a malevolent intent. I stumbled backwards, knocking over a pile of boxes, and the figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. That night, I dreamt of a family living in the house years ago, their faces twisted in terror. The dreams grew more vivid and disturbing, each night showing me more of the family's tragic fate. I saw them huddled together in the attic, hiding from something, their fear palpable. One night, I woke to find my daughter standing at the foot of our bed, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered, "The man in the attic wants us to leave," before collapsing into tears. We tried to assure her it was just a bad dream, but the fear in her eyes told me otherwise. Over the next few days, strange occurrences intensified. Objects moved on their own, and we heard disembodied voices. My wife and I both saw shadowy figures darting out of the corner of our eyes. One evening, the power went out, and we heard heavy footsteps descending from the attic. Armed with a flashlight, I ventured up again, determined to find the source of the disturbances. I found an old journal tucked away in a corner, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. The entries described a man who had gone mad, believing his family was possessed by evil spirits. He had locked them in the attic, convinced he was saving them, but they perished in the dark. As I read, the temperature dropped, and I saw my breath misting in the air. A cold hand touched my shoulder, and I spun around to see the ghostly figure of the madman, his eyes wild with fury. He lunged at me, and I bolted down the stairs, not stopping until I was outside in the cool night air. We moved out the next day, unable to stay in a house haunted by such a tragic past. Have you ever lived in a house with a dark history? Share your stories in the comments below. Number 3. The abandoned asylum. My friends and I were thrill seekers, always looking for the next adrenaline rush. So when we heard about the abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town, we knew we had to explore it. The building loomed over us, its windows shattered and walls covered in graffiti, a testament to years of neglect. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our footsteps. As we ventured inside, the darkness seemed to swallow us whole, our flashlights barely piercing the gloom. The hallways were lined with old medical equipment, rusted and broken, relics of a bygone era. We found patient records scattered on the floor, detailing the horrific treatments that had taken place within these walls. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the building itself resented our presence. We heard whispers echoing through the halls, too faint to make out, but they sent chills down our spines. One of my friends swore he saw a figure darting past a doorway, but when we investigated, we found nothing. We came across an old operating room, the table still stained with what looked like blood. As we explored further, we found a series of cells, each one more claustrophobic than the last. The walls were covered in scratch marks, and we found chains and restraints, evidence of the inhumane treatments that had occurred. One of the cells had a message scrawled on the wall they never left written in what looked like dried blood. We heard a loud bang from somewhere deeper in the asylum, and our nerves were on edge as we tried to locate the source. The further we went, the more intense the feeling of being watched became, as if unseen eyes were following our every move. We found an old photograph of the asylum staff, their expressions grim and haunted. As we studied the photo, we noticed a shadowy figure in the background, almost indistinguishable but undeniably sinister. One of my friends suddenly screamed, pointing at a dark corner where he claimed to see a ghostly figure watching us. The figure vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving us all shaken and eager to leave. We decided to head back, but the way out seemed to shift and change, as if the building was trying to keep us inside. Panic set in as we realized we were lost, the hallways all looking the same in the dim light. We heard footsteps behind us, but when we turned, there was no one there. Our flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. One of my friends felt a cold hand grab his arm, leaving a bruise in the shape of fingers. We finally found the exit, but the door was jammed, and we had to force it open with all our strength. As we burst outside, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, and we could finally breathe again. We vowed never to return, the experience leaving us all deeply unsettled. That night, I dreamt of the asylum, its dark halls and ghostly figures haunting my sleep. I woke up with a start, feeling a cold presence in my room, and saw the shadowy figure from the asylum standing at the foot of my bed. The figure vanished as soon as I turned on the light, but the fear lingered. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something followed us home from that forsaken place. Have you ever explored an abandoned building? What did you find? Share your stories in the comments below. Number 4. The Vanishing Hiker. My friends and I were avid hikers, always searching for new trails to conquer. The dense, remote forest we discovered seemed perfect for our next adventure. However, we had no idea what awaited us in those dark woods. As we entered the forest, the canopy of trees blocked out most of the sunlight, casting eerie shadows on the ground. The air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of moss and decaying leaves, a stark contrast to the warm, sunny day we left behind. The deeper we ventured, the more oppressive the silence became, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves and distant bird calls. We followed an old, barely visible trail, our footsteps crunching on the thick carpet of leaves and twigs. After a couple of hours, we stumbled upon an abandoned campsite with a decaying tent and scattered belongings. Among the items, we found an old journal, the pages weathered and almost unreadable, detailing the last days of a hiker who had gone missing years ago. The entries described strange noises at night, shadowy figures in the trees, and a growing sense of dread that had plagued the hiker. As we read the journal, the forest seemed to grow darker, and a feeling of unease settled over us. We decided to press on, but the atmosphere grew more oppressive with each step, as if the forest itself was watching us. Strange symbols carved into the trees appeared along the trail, their meaning unknown but undeniably ominous. The path became more difficult to follow, and we realized we were wandering deeper into the forest than we had intended. We heard distant whispers carried on the wind, too faint to understand, but enough to send chills down our spines. As we paused to rest, we noticed the forest had become unnaturally quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife absent. One of my friends spotted a shadowy figure moving between the trees, but it disappeared before we could get a better look. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and we quickened our pace, eager to find our way back. Suddenly, we heard a blood-curdling scream echo through the forest, freezing us in our tracks. We debated whether to investigate or flee, but curiosity got the better of us, and we cautiously moved towards the sound. We found a clearing with an old, overgrown stone circle, the air thick with an otherworldly presence. At the center of the circle lay an old, tattered backpack, similar to the one described in the missing hiker's journal. As we examined the backpack, we heard footsteps approaching from the trees, but saw no one. Panic set in, and we decided to leave the forest, following the trail markers as quickly as possible. The forest seemed to close in around us, the path twisting and turning, leading us in circles. We heard rustling in the underbrush, and a shadowy figure emerged briefly before vanishing into the trees. Our sense of direction failed us, and we realized we were lost, the forest seemingly shifting around us. As night fell, the darkness became almost tangible, and the forest came alive with strange sounds and unseen movements. We huddled together for safety, our flashlights barely penetrating the oppressive gloom. In the middle of the night, one of my friends vanished without a trace, leaving only his belongings behind. We searched frantically, calling his name, but there was no response, only the eerie silence of the forest. The next morning we found the trail again and followed it out of the forest, the feeling of dread lingering. We reported our friend's disappearance to the authorities, but despite an extensive search, he was never found. The forest remains a mystery, a place where the boundaries between our world and the unknown blur. Have you ever ventured into a place that made you question reality? Share your experiences in the comments below. 5. The Cursed Doll. It started innocently enough. I found the doll at a local antique store, its delicate features and vintage charm drawing me in. Little did I know, bringing it home would invite something sinister into my life. The doll was beautiful, with porcelain skin, glass eyes, and a hand-sewn dress, a relic from a bygone era. I placed it on a shelf in my living room, thinking it would be a lovely decoration. That's when strange things began to happen. The first night I heard faint giggling coming from the living room, but dismissed it as my imagination. The next morning I found the doll in a different position, as if it had moved on its own during the night. Over the next few days, I started hearing whispers, too soft to make out the words but chilling nonetheless. Objects around the house began to move on their own, and I often found the doll in different places. One evening, I heard the sound of tiny footsteps running down the hallway, but no one was there. My dog refused to go near the doll, growling and barking whenever it was in sight. I woke up one night to find the doll sitting at the foot of my bed, its glass eyes staring at me. I decided to lock the doll in a cabinet, hoping to end the strange occurrences, but it didn't help. The whispers grew louder, and I could almost make out the words "let me out." One night, I woke to the sound of the cabinet door creaking open and found the doll sitting in the hallway. I felt a cold presence in the house, and my breath would mist in the air, despite the warmth of the room. Shadows moved on their own, and I often saw the figure of a little girl out of the corner of my eye. I researched the doll's origins and discovered it once belonged to a little girl who died tragically. The girl's spirit was said to be attached to the doll, and those who owned it experienced strange and terrifying events. I contacted a paranormal expert, hoping they could help me get rid of the doll and the spirit attached to it. The expert conducted a cleansing ritual, but the activity only intensified, as if the spirit was angered. I started having vivid nightmares of the little girl, her face twisted in rage, and the doll always by her side. My health began to deteriorate, with frequent headaches and a constant feeling of unease. I decided to get rid of the doll, but every time I tried, it would reappear in my home. Desperate, I buried the doll in a remote location, hoping to break the curse. That night, I woke to find dirt and leaves scattered around my living room, the doll sitting in the center. I realized I couldn't escape it, and the doll's presence became more oppressive, the air thick with its malevolence. The whispers became screams, and the little girl's spirit appeared more frequently, her eyes filled with anger. I knew I had to find a way to appease the spirit, or I would never know peace again. I learned of a ritual that could potentially free the spirit and performed it with great care. The ritual seemed to work, and the activity ceased for a time, giving me a false sense of security. But one night, I heard the familiar giggling and saw the doll sitting on the shelf, its glass eyes glinting in the darkness. The spirit had not left, and the doll remained cursed, a constant reminder of the little girl's tragic fate. Have you ever encountered an object that seemed to have a life of its own? Share your stories in the comments below. 6. The entity in the mirror. It started with a harmless game. My friends and I decided to try the old Bloody Mary legend, not believing for a second that anything would happen. We were wrong. We gathered in the bathroom, turned off the lights, and lit a single candle, the flickering flame casting eerie shadows. We chanted Bloody Mary 3 times, our voices nervous but filled with anticipation. For a moment, nothing happened, and we laughed, feeling silly for believing in such a childish game. Then, the temperature dropped suddenly, and our breaths misted in the air, a chill seeping into our bones. The candle flickered wildly, and the shadows on the walls seemed to dance and twist. In the mirror, we saw a faint outline, a figure standing just behind us, its features blurred and indistinct. We turned around, but there was no one there, only the oppressive darkness and the flickering candlelight. Panic set in, and we decided to end the game, but the mirror seemed to hold us in its grip, reflecting our fear. The figure in the mirror grew clearer, its eyes dark and hollow, a sinister smile spreading across its face. We tried to leave the bathroom, but the door wouldn't budge, as if an unseen force was holding it shut. The figure reached out, its hand pressing against the glass, and we felt an icy touch on our skin. One of my friends screamed, pointing at the mirror where the figure's face had twisted into a mask of rage. The candle went out, plunging us into darkness, and we heard a low, guttural growl echoing in the room. We fumbled for the light switch, our hearts pounding, and when the lights came on, the figure was gone. But the mirror was cracked, and we all bore the marks of icy fingers on our skin, proof that we weren't imagining things. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. We saw shadowy figures in mirrors and heard whispers in empty rooms. My friends and I started having the same nightmares, of a woman with dark eyes and a twisted smile chasing us through a maze of mirrors. We avoided mirrors as much as possible, but the entity seemed to find ways to reach us, even in reflections in windows and water. One night I woke to find a message written in condensation on my bathroom mirror, "I'm coming for you." The entity's presence grew stronger, and we felt its eyes on us constantly, a heavy weight of dread. We sought help from a paranormal expert, who told us that we had summoned a malevolent spirit, one that thrived on fear. The expert performed a cleansing ritual, but the entity's presence remained, as if mocking our efforts. We decided to break the mirrors in our homes, hoping to sever the entity's connection to our world. But the act seemed to anger it further, and the nightmares intensified, the entity's rage palpable. We realized we had to confront the spirit directly, and returned to the bathroom where it all began. We repeated the ritual, this time with more conviction, and demanded the entity leave us in peace. The figure appeared in the mirror, its eyes filled with hatred, and the room grew cold and dark. We felt a powerful force pushing against us, but we stood our ground, chanting prayers and invocations. The entity let out a terrifying scream, the mirror shattering into countless pieces, and we felt the oppressive presence lift. In the aftermath, we cleaned up the shattered glass and tried to move on, but the experience left us all scarred. Even now, I can't look into a mirror without feeling a sense of dread, fearing that the entity might return. Have you ever experienced something unexplainable with a mirror? Share your experiences in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.